guys, Miss Osborne back again with another review PowerPoint, where today we're talking about the Jazz Age, which was the 1920s to 1930. As you watch the video, make sure that you're answering the guided questions provided. It's okay if you need to pause or rewatch the video in order to answer the guided questions. When the video ends, summarize what you watched in paragraph form, making sure that you hit on the main points of the video. Make sure that you use specific vocabulary that are indicated on your WSQ sheet. These are going to appear as bolded and underlined words. Finish by asking one question. That question can be something that you're confused about, a general question, or a discussion question for the class. The essential questions that we're going to be looking at in this video are: how did social and technological changes during the 1920s affect the lives of Americans? And then what are the defining characteristics of the Harlem Renaissance? During the 1920s, the standard of living rose and more people moved to urban centers. Essentially, everybody moved to the cities. In those cities, there were a large number of women and men working in office jobs. Rather than working in low-paying jobs, many more people were moving into managerial positions. Increases in consumer marketing and consumer goods also led to that rise of the standard of living. People were being able to buy new things like refrigerators and dishwashers and washing machines. Also, more and more people are going to start investing in the stock market. One of the biggest industrial creations was the automobile. This allowed people to move from place to place. Henry Ford created the assembly line that was used to produce the Model T. The assembly line was a great innovation because it allowed these goods to be created cheaply. Not everybody benefited from the economic prosperity of the 1920s. Primarily out in the Midwest, farmers were suffering from falling agricultural prices. They were not able to buy the goods that they needed in order to keep their farms going. In the Midwest, due to over-farming, the Dust Bowl struck, ruining crops and driving farmers deeper into debt. There wasn't a lot of good soil out in the Midwest because they had overproduced from the land. Republican presidents of the 1920s favored tax cuts for the wealthy Americans. They thought that if they were able to give more money to the wealthier Americans, then their money would trickle down to the poor Americans. Federal agencies were also created during the Progressive era. They started aiding businesses rather than individual Americans. Republican presidents maintained isolationist policies during this time period, meaning that the United States needed to stay out of all foreign conflicts and other entanglements. The United States actively participated in policies regarding international finances and the repayment of war reparations by Germany. The United States actually provided private loans to assist Germany in repaying its wartime loans. The Kellogg-Briand Pact was signed instead of the U.S. joining the League of Nations. The United States didn't want to join the League of Nations because they felt like it would entangle them in alliances that would lead to another war. But the Kellogg-Briand Pact did pledge peace among all of the nations participating. 1920s was the time of lax social standards and lots of what people saw as sin. The Lost Generation was a group of key writers during the 1920s that became disillusioned with American society, so they moved to Europe away from the American government. The Lost Generation criticized materialism and conformity of the middle class, saying that they all were dressing the same and acting the same and listening to the same stuff, and were too materialistic or focused on products and goods. Jazz became the most popular music form among young people because it represented a break in tradition. Its fast-moving beat and pop swing music attracted a wide audience. It was mainly African-American musicians that created jazz, and they played in white clubs such as the Cotton Club. Technological innovations in radio made long-distance radio broadcasts possible. Between the radio and the automobile, this created a more common culture amongst urban and rural communities, or cities and the rural areas. Fundamentalism was an anti-liberal and anti-secular movement that gained strength during the 1920s. Being anti-liberal and anti-secular, they were against separation of church and state. They were mainly Christian. The Scopes trial represented the fundamentalist movement. It's also known as the monkey trial. It's an important case in which religion was tested against modern science. John T. Scopes was a high school biology teacher in Tennessee who was arrested for teaching evolution in his high school classroom. The Scopes trial illustrated the cultural conflict between fundamentalism and modernism. The KKK also expanded through the 1920s, mainly through propaganda, but primarily the film The Birth of a Nation. The Birth of a Nation film shows the KKK members and their hostilities. The KKK favors white supremacy and restrictions on immigration. They're often hostile toward immigrants, Catholics, Jews, and Native African Americans. We call this Nativism. Nativism means anybody who opposes immigrants. The National Origins Act of 1924 was designed to use quotas to restrict the flow of newcomers from Southern and Eastern Europe. People in cities were tired of all of the immigrants coming into America, threatening their culture and their jobs. The Sacco and Vanzetti case was significant because it illustrated this fear of immigrants. Sacco and Vanzetti were put in jail because they had robbed a bank and also murdered somebody. However, there was little evidence, but they were still electrocuted and given the death sentence because of their immigrant status and the fact that they were radicals. The Harlem Renaissance was an outpouring of black art and literature during the 1920s. Many writers and artists focused on their pride in African American culture and the struggle for full equality. Langston Hughes is one of the most famous poets for focusing on the struggle that African Americans experienced in the early 1900s. Key figures also included James Weldon Johnson, who wrote many songs, and Zora Neale Hurston, who was an African American literature writer. The Great Migration of black Americans from the rural South to the urban North and West continued into the 1920s. Many African Americans were escaping the South because of the discrimination that was occurring there and the violence from the KKK. Most are coming to the North for industrial jobs, but they also came to escape discrimination. Flappers in the 1920s symbolized the new freedom, then they challenged the traditional American attitudes towards women. They favored a short, bobbed haircut, they smoked cigarettes that were not intended for women, and had higher hemlines than the traditional woman. In the picture to the right, you can see that the hemlines don't reach down to the floor, but are rather closer up to where the woman's knee is. This was considered extremely scandalous. New jobs also became available in offices and stores, and single women moved into the workforce. Women did not receive equal pay and continued to face discrimination in the workplace through the 1920s. Married women also did not seek employment outside of the home. They were instead required to stay at home to take care of the family. Women had also received the 19th Amendment following World War I because of their participation in the war that gave them the right to vote. However, many women continued to vote along the same lines as their husband or their fathers. Don't forget to answer the guided questions. If you missed one, watch the video again, pausing where you need to. Once you feel like you have a good understanding of the video, summarize it in paragraph form, the main points, making sure that you use the specific vocabulary on the WSQ sheet. Then finish up by asking one question, either something that you're still confused about, a general question, or a discussion question for the class. Thank you so much for joining me for this video. I hope to see you again tomorrow.